Welcome to the Hockey Writers Blackhawks Banter, a weekly show with our top Chicago Blackhawks writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from Chelsea Dagger to the Madhouse on Madison, our team covers everything that happens with the Hawks. So get comfortable, grab a beverage. It's time for some Blackhawks Banter. Blackhawks Banter.
Hello, hockey fans, and welcome to episode 80 of Blackhawks Banter, brought to you by the Hockey Writers. It's the Anton Vermette episode, the only Blackhawks to ever wear number 80. He played 39 games, but 20 in the playoffs. And man, his contributions were pretty important in that last Stanley Cup in 2015. So we honor him. But those were the good old days, and we can't live in the past forever. So tonight, I would like to share with you that we have a very special guest with us, Jim Parsons, who covers the Edmonton Oilers for the Hockey Writers. And Jim has been with THW for 6 years, going on 6 years now. One of our most successful writers. And besides his Oilers coverage, he also does the daily news and rumors for the site. So welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you. I appreciate it. By the way, I really like the fact that you number your episodes and then you figure out who's related to that number. That's super creative. I love it.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun with it. We try to have our little quirks around here. And of course, I am with my partner in crime, Brooke LoFurno, tonight. So how are you doing, Brooke?
Doing well. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah. So, of course, we're going to talk some Blackhawks Oilers connections here tonight. And one of the biggest of those is, of course, Duncan Keith. We all know that after 16 seasons with the Blackhawks, he made the jump to the Oilers this past season to be closer to his son, Colton. So, Jim, I wanted to ask you actually a couple things about Duncan Keith. It's my understanding that Oilers Nation over there wasn't too happy with Keith at first because, well, A, they were, had to take on that hefty cap hit, $5.5 million for 2 more years. And B, there was some drama around him, showing up late to training camp. So how would you say the fan feels about him now? And has he lived up to your expectations in the regular season and the playoffs?
Duncan Keith's a funny story because there were about 3 different groups of people that looked at that trade and said, okay, one, Duncan Keith is a fantastic leader. He's going to be great for this hockey team. That was one group. The other group was like, Duncan Keith is washed up. What the heck are we doing? Why would we add him? That was the other group. And then others were like, well, Duncan Keith's pretty good, but he's pretty expensive. So those were kind of the 3 groups that people seem to fall into with Duncan Keith. I was in the latter. I really liked the idea of Duncan Keith on this team. I thought he could add a lot. He had playoff experience. I think he's got more than almost any other Oiler combined on this team. I knew that he could be useful, but I didn't like the cap hit at all. I was not a fan of the fact that Ken Holland did not actually get Chicago to retain any salary in that deal. I thought, how could you not? The only team that he's going to is Edmonton, right? Like that was legitimately what was on the table there. So I was a little whatever. Having said that, there's a lot of change in Oilers Nation here about how Duncan Keith has performed this year. He has done everything that you could have expected him to do. He's played those minutes on the second line left, pairing behind Darnell Nurse. And when Darnell Nurse has struggled at times, which he has, Duncan Keith has stepped in there. He's done very good. Now he's had those moments that you would expect of a guy who's older and a little slower. He's been burned a couple times, but he's been very, very solid. And he's provided that playoff experience. The series against Colorado, notwithstanding, not going so well right now, but definitely not Duncan Keith's fault. In fact, he's one of the better defensemen of that group of 6 that seems to get a regular rotation here for Edmonton. So people have changed, I think, a little bit. Yeah, you're going to have those people that still don't like the cap hit, and they won't like it next season either. But he's been what you would hope he would be. He's been playing minutes. He's not been overextended by playing too much. He's been effective. He's been a good leader. He's kind of running things in terms of getting guys to stay focused when they need to stay focused. He's been what Duncan Keith should be, just a little costly. So I like the trade. I don't mind having added him, but the cap hit's still going to be a problem next year.
Yeah, we didn't like that cap hit either here in Chicago. Brooke, how about you? What are your thoughts about Keith with his play and in the playoffs?
I'm sorry. The Blackhawks are so bad with contracts. I'm sorry. The cap hits. Oh boy.
Well, this is one that worked out well, though. We said it somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. It actually kind of worked out for us in some way. Sorry about that. Do you know when I was watching the last game against the Avalanche, that was game 3. I was genuinely looking for Duncan Keith mistakes, because obviously the team has struggled a little bit here against Colorado. And usually you think if they're struggling, it's probably on your 38-year-old defenseman. But I didn't notice him, and that's a good thing. That means he's doing okay. And when I did notice him, he wasn't bad at all. I actually think, like you said, he's doing what he usually does, and that's a good thing. And I think me and Gail talked about this before. Even though the Blackhawks defense obviously was very bad, Duncan Keith was far from the problem. He's not what he used to be, of course. He's obviously, lost a couple steps, but he's still very effective and still a good defenseman. So I'm actually glad to see that he's doing okay. And I think I saw he was a plus 15 in the regular season for Duncan Keith. That's really good. No one even on the Blackhawks was a plus on our defense. So you know what? Like I said, you're getting exactly what you expected, I think, out of him. Like you said, not perfect. He's not what he used to be, but still very good, still very reliable. And so, like I said, I'm happy that he's not noticeable in a bad way and he's doing what he's there to do. So, yeah, like I said, I think that's okay for him, especially. And you know what? That contract's only for 1 more year, I think, which is nice for you guys. I don't know if he'll be there, but we'll see.
I assume he'll be there. And one of the things I want to point out to give him a lot of credit is what he's done for Evan Bouchard. Here's a guy who is a very, very solid mentor to a kid who is just getting used to the NHL. And I would put I'd put at least $1.5 million on the value of that alone, because what he's done for Bouchard and helped him elevate his game to the next level. Bouchard's going to be a very, very solid defenseman. And they started to pair those two together halfway through the season. I don't know why they didn't do it earlier, but that pairing made a lot of sense. And Bouchard has really, really become, I don't think he becomes what he is without Duncan Keith.
Yeah, I love it. I noticed that too. And like you said, you can't replace that experience in this league for sure.
He certainly played that mentor role in Chicago as well. With Piharu and
Ian Mitchell, he was paired with for a bit.
Yeah. And just one more thing that I'd like to add is he's lived up to his bargain of kind of one of the contingencies of the trade, which was the 3rd round pick would turn into a 2nd round pick if he was in the top 4 in ice time in the playoffs. Now, that was also contingent of the Oilers getting to the final, which who knows if that's going to happen. I think we're all,
Probably not. The odds are not good. Was it 4 of 198 for teams to come back from 3-0? It's not looking good.
There's still a chance, though.
There's still a chance. It's like Dumb and Dumber. So you say, and there's a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
But kudos to Keith for living up to his expectations, and I'm glad to hear, Jim, that he's playing that mentor role as well. So that's good. Kind of getting caught up on Duncan Keith. Let's turn this around to Caleb Jones, because he was actually received by the Blackhawks as a return for part of the return for Duncan Keith. And Jim, Jones he only played 33 games, it looks like, in the 2021-22 season. No, that was this season. Yeah, no, this past. And he earned 4 assists at that time. 2019-20 campaign, a little bit more productive, 4 goals and 9 points in 43 games. What would you say were some of his assets, or maybe you want to go in the way of what some of his weaknesses were to his time in Edmonton?
You know what? That's a tough one, because he didn't play much. Like, he was a guy that was always on the verge, right? He was the 7th, 8th guy. You always looked at him at the beginning of camp and said, is he going to play this season? Prior to the trade, he had probably played his most games that year, but he still didn't really tell you what he was. You couldn't really figure out and get a handle on how good or not great Caleb Jones was going to wind up being. And that was the biggest issue here, I think, in Edmonton, was that nobody really knew what he was. It was hard to figure out if he was going to be reliable, if he was going to have issues. And they didn't play him enough to find out. Some of the same things can be said about a guy like Ethan Bear, who went to Carolina, right? There was a group of people in Edmonton, William Laguson's one of them too, that just didn't really ever break through. And Caleb Jones was probably not going to have a future with Edmonton. And so that, I think, and when you have Seth Jones in Chicago, it makes a lot of sense to put the brothers together. And I'm sure that's why Chicago was interested. It just made more sense to move them. So to be totally honest with you, I don't even know, to be frank, what Caleb Jones is. I'm sure that maybe you guys don't even know yet, because he hasn't played enough to really cement himself as any certain type of defenseman. He's supposed to be well-rounded. He's supposed to be pretty reliable. I don't know if he's got the offensive punch, if he's ever going to be anything more than a 5 or 6 guy. But that certainly didn't play itself out in Edmonton. So they moved him simply because they could afford to, and they had bigger things that they wanted to do, Keith and then other people coming in. They had the depth. There was no need to keep him. there was some people who around Edmonton who were kind of like, man, he could have been something. I think you look at this season and how little he played and you go, well, we never know what was the harm in moving him. So I think it was one of those things where he could have been something. He still could be, but I don't think it would ever going to happen in Edmonton. So you move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of the consensus we have too here in Chicago. It's kind of like, okay, what is he? But Brooke, Caleb Jones did show some promise with Blackhawks this season. Career high, 5 goals, 15 points in 51 games. What did you think of his play? And do you think that the Blackhawks should re-sign him because he is a free agent this season?
Yeah. To kind of add to what Jim said, that was one thing I was worried about when the Blackhawks got Caleb Jones in the Keith trade. It was more like, okay, we're trading away a future for kind of an unknown, or not a future, but more just like a Hall of Famer for an unknown. So that was a little scary, but understand the whole package there. I actually thought Caleb Jones got better as the season went on. I think he started off kind of rough, but most of the defense did. But then I think he got a little better. He started to play with a lot more edge. He got a little feistiness to him, which I guess you like to see. And then even with the limited playing time, he did tie his brother in goals, and that was the most of the defense. So I don't think the Blackhawks will re-sign him, though. Here's the thing that the Blackhawks have still. We have so many like could-be's. All of these people have potential. We don't know what they're going to be, though. He kind of falls, I think, in that similar area. But like I said, I like him a lot. I think he could be something. I wouldn't mind at all if the Blackhawks kept him. But the reality is they have 14 defensemen signed on for next season. I don't know where he falls into that group. So I don't know if they'll want to use him to trade him, maybe. I think that's a possibility. But yeah, I like him a lot, actually. I think he grew a lot this year. I think someone will take a chance on him for sure. But I think it's kind of gotten a little crowded, and I think he might get pushed out, and that's no fault of his own. It's just the way it is.
See, no, I would disagree. I think that he will get re-signed. And I say that, I mean, obviously he made his mistakes, but, and there's a number of defensive prospects with a higher ceiling, but Kyle Davidson and company has made it clear that they don't want to rush their prospects. And so I feel like he could be a really good placeholder. They can sign him for cheap. They can sign him for a shorter term. And he can fill in. He's shown that he can be a serviceable bottom pairing defenseman. He can jump into the offense. Jim, you mentioned that. He's shown that he's got that kind of offensive side as well. So I could see him being re-signed and, being somebody that really could kind of fill in until someone else is ready.
Totally not opposed to that. I agree with that for sure.
Can I ask you guys a question? How much do you think the fact that Seth Jones was involved in the equation of adding Caleb, and how much do you think Seth Jones could be a factor in re-signing Caleb?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, right. Seth Jones is your future. I mean, there's people are talking about him being the next captain. And so I think that they're going to want to keep him happy.
That's what I'm thinking, right?
I mean, that's not good. I really feel like that's not the only reason, but it certainly could factor in. I don't know. Would you agree, Brooke?
Yeah, I know that Stan Bowman said at the time when he acquired Caleb Jones that it wasn't just because of Seth that he's had his eye on Caleb for a while, but it just ended up turning out that way, that he was able to get both of them, and everyone was like, sure, Jan, sure. But I think he actually had a point there. I think there was something there to Caleb. So yeah, I do think, though, obviously, of course, they seem like they really love each other and enjoy playing together. And they had some success together too when they did play together this season. So yeah, I do think that could factor in for sure. But I'm sure that Seth, though, understands the business side too. He wants what's best for his brother too, whether that's here or elsewhere. So it is interesting, though.
We'll find out eventually, won't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or not. All right, you guys, we're about halfway through our show, so I would like to take this opportunity to tell you about the Hockey Writers Daily Newsletter. You can get all the latest hockey news and updates right to your inbox Monday through Friday. All you have to do is go to morningskate.io to get signed up. I love to read this. Take about 5 minutes to read this first thing in the morning, and then I'm all caught up on the hockey news. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to that. And this now is the time in our show where we'd like to address some trade rumors, specifically surrounding the Blackhawks and the Oilers, of course.
It's my favorite.
I know you like it, and I know
you
love it too. So trade rumors. Jim, you had mentioned to me that there's been some scuttlebutt about Dylan Strome perhaps going to the Oilers, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you've heard.
Okay, I should probably clarify, though. It's not one of those things where it's new. It's not a new development. It's not a new rumor. This is something that's been going on basically since Connor McDavid and Dylan Strome played together in Erie. These guys were with the Otters organization. They played very well together. there's always been that, could Dylan Strome and Connor McDavid be reunited and create some of that magic they had with the Erie Otters again? And that's always been in the background. So every time something comes up with Dylan Strome, which seems to be all the time in Chicago, the Oilers get mentioned. And so that's why I say the rumor is there, because the Oilers are in a situation where they have, right now, I would say they don't have any room for a guy like Dylan Strome on their cap. They don't have contract space, but they have a few guys that could be on the move. We don't know what's going on with Evander Kane. He's a unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. He's got his whole grievance thing with San Jose. We're not really sure where all that's going to wind up. So Dylan Strome is going to be one of those guys that's sort of off in the corner, right? If you don't know what's happening with Chicago, if they end up moving him or he doesn't get qualified or whatever the case might be, you will hear the Oilers' name. That name will come up because, to me, and when you look at it from the outside, Dylan Strome seems to perform pretty well when you put him with some pretty good players. And guys like Patrick Kane have said, Dylan Strome's a good hockey player. But when he plays in a bottom six role, he doesn't always give you the numbers that you're hoping for. I would believe if you put him in Edmonton, you're probably putting him in the top six. And if you can reunite McDavid and Dylan Strome, you might have some magic there. So that's where that rumor comes from. Is it's been connected from day one since he was drafted, since they played in Erie. There's always that little, I wonder what would happen if we put McDavid and Dylan Strome together. Keeping in mind, though, that there's got to be a lot of things that fall a certain way for that to even work out for both teams, right? Chicago's got to decide to move on. Edmonton's got to have room to make it work. They have a few of their own contracts. I think we'll talk about them in a little bit, like Jesse Puljujarvi, Kyler Yamamoto. Those guys, they have to be figured out in Edmonton too, right? So once you know that, then maybe you look at Dylan Strome. So it's a long shot, but it is out there and it has been out there for a while.
Well, Chicago's already got the market cornered when it comes to this Erie Otters thing with Strome and Alex DeBrincat. So stop stealing our thunder.
And Taylor Radish. So we're trying to build him.
I'm actually a person, in my recent article, I wrote that I picked the Blackhawks. He's kind of my upset pick for the Blackhawks to re-sign Dylan Strome. I'm not sure. I would not be surprised if they do not go that way, but I'd like to see him in return. Brooke, I wanted to ask you, you've been back and forth all season long and last season as well in regards to Dylan Strome. What are your thoughts about all this?
I don't know. I'm still conflicted because he did so well, and it would be nice to see him back to see if he could kind of replicate that success. But at the same time, I understand the business side of it too. He is going to command a lot more than he did on his last contract because of the good year he had. And I know that they want to save money for a DeBrincat extension, and that kind of stuff is involved. So I can see them wanting to trade him for assets for the rebuild. I could see that happening. And I could see them maybe wanting to move on for a business standpoint and cap standpoint. So I really don't know which way they're going to go. But honestly, I felt strongly that I wanted them to trade him before the season. Now I'm kind of I'm okay with either. I think I understand both sides. Let's put it that way. But I do agree with you, Jim, that when I did hear trade rumors about Dylan Strome, the two teams I consistently saw were the Oilers and the Bruins. Those were the two teams I kept seeing all over the place. So if he did move on, I wouldn't be surprised if he was with either team, because it usually seems like where there's smoke, there's fire sometimes in this league, and that consistently pops up. So we'll see. But like I said, that's an interesting one. I know we'll keep an eye on that a lot for sure, because we have no clue which way they're going to go. I do know, last thing though, that Elliot Friedman, I think, recently said he did hear that he thinks that they might be moving on from Strome. So we'll see, but that's a really hard decision for sure, because he is a good player, but sometimes those decisions aren't easy in a rebuild.
It depends on the return for him too. Which,
yeah.
Don't get much return for him, but who knows? We'll find out.
The Bruins would make a lot of sense based on the fact that they got a lot of questions this summer, right? There's a lot of guys out with injuries. They need more scoring. I could see that. I could see Strome to the Bruins.
Okay, Brooke, I wanted to ask you about a rumor connection. You had brought up Jesse Pula. I don't know how to say his name.
Puljujarvi. It's a fun one. Jesse Puljujarvi.
Thank you. What have you heard there? What's going on with that?
So this is a name I was actually interested in getting your insight on, Jim, because Jesse Puljujarvi was someone that I've heard linked to the Blackhawks even since 2019, when he was kind of unsigned and he was kind of going back and forth, and he was just kind of floating out there. And then he comes in and has a career year this year. He's still very young. He's only 24. I know that Oiler Nation probably really likes him, but he's probably also someone you could maybe move on from. So I don't know. I think there could be some sense there with the Blackhawks. I know they said they were pretty interested. There was rumors that they were really interested in him and bringing him into Chicago as a good offensive threat, good depth player. So the more I look at it, the more I'm like, I could see that making sense. I know he's a free agent. Anything can happen. Obviously, he had a career year. Would be hard to use or lose him for you guys, but I could see that making sense a lot for Chicago, especially during a rebuild. Same thing with Dylan Strome, young guy, but still maybe won't command as much. What do you think, Jim?
Well, we talk about guys being in different categories. Like we talked about Duncan Keith and the 3 categories of people that thought different ways. There's 2 categories for Puljujarvi. There's the analytics supporters who love him. They absolutely love him because his underlying numbers are fantastic. And then there's the people who are like, man, the guy's got to score more, right? As a person, as a player, as a personality, people love him. Like the guy's just super likable. He's developed his nickname as the Bison King because he took a picture with a buffalo here in Alberta, got way closer than he probably ever should have. And it's kind of stuck, right? He's really solid. The problem is he's not putting up the numbers that most hockey fans that don't follow the sport a ton look at, which is goals and assists and things like that. He's not giving you a lot of that. He's had a career year, but the hope was he'd get 20 goals. He didn't quite get there. He hasn't done a whole lot in the playoffs. I think he's got 1 and 2 assists or something like that. But he's a solid player, and I think he will be very, very good. He's a restricted free agent, and I think the biggest thing that the Oilers are going to have to factor in is what happens with Evander Kane here. If you're going to try to make room for everybody, and if Kane comes back, which would probably be at least $5 million a season, you might not have room for Puljujarvi, and that's the reality of it. So there's the one group of people who look at him and say, okay, well, his underlying numbers are good. Don't get rid of him. You'd be selling low, and it would be a huge mistake because he's going to explode at some point here. And then there's the other people who are like, well, we've tried this for a few years. He went away, he came back, he went international to Finland, he come back, not really breaking through. So maybe we do have to move him so we can sign a guy like Kane. So there's 2 schools of thought here. For me, I would keep Puljujarvi. I think he's got a really huge future. He's a big guy, got some speed, plays the game well. He's got to get those goals, right? That's the kick. Wherever he goes, if he winds up in Chicago or he winds up somewhere else, if he leaves Edmonton, they're probably going to do well. I think Puljujarvi will break out at some point and be a very solid player. Just got to put it all together. That's the key for him.
Yeah, and I think that there's one thing I want to point out, Gail, is that he actually got more votes this year in the Selke voting than Sidney Crosby. So there's something. He got I think it was like a 6-way tie or something for 27th place with 3 votes. So that's something.
3 votes. You know, this just shows the discrepancy, though, between Chicago and Edmonton, I think, because I'm wondering if I looked up his stats wrong. 14 goals, 22 assists, 36 points, and he plays on the 3rd line.
He's streaky. Like he'll give you 2 in a game and then another one and then one more and then not score for like 12, 13 games.
That was
right?
Dylan Strome for a bit. That kind of reminds me of Dylan Strome a little bit. So maybe if he did get a change of scenery, that would help him.
Yes. No, but he did have a good year, and he just hasn't been able to take and elevate to that next level they're all been hoping for. And it'll happen. Watch, it'll happen. They'll move him, and then next year he'll just explode, right?
He'll beat the Blackhawks. Woo!
Well, I would have to learn how to say his name right. So. All right, you guys, let's round out the show here with some discussion about the Western Conference Final, obviously, because it's between the Oilers and the Colorado Avalanche. This is where we have the ultimate irony of recording on Monday night before Game 4. And, you know, the Avs have already won the first 3 games. So by the time this show drops, you will know whether the Avs swept the series or whether the Oilers live to fight another day, but we don't know yet. So before we get into some predictions and see if we're correct or not, I know that Brooke wanted to touch base with Jim here a little bit about goaltender Mike Smith and his play in the playoffs. So Brooke, I'm going to give you the floor to kind of pose your question to Jim.
Yeah, it's more like he's been very confusing in this playoff stretch, I think, because he did very well against Calgary. Even better, I think, than most people thought. Even better than Markstrom, who was considered a Vezina finalist. And then comes into Colorado, and we already knew Colorado would be a very hard matchup for any team, not just the Oilers. And then he struggled a little bit. He's had some really good saves and then some goals that were kind of questionable. And I feel bad saying this, but I understand that the Oilers need to score more than 2 goals to win a game against the Avalanche. And then Mike Smith kind of lets in that bad goal. So I guess how much of this do you put on Mike Smith? Let's put it that way, of what's happening in the Colorado series.
Sure. It would be very different if the Oilers were playing well in front of them, and they kind of aren't, right?
Yeah.
Like the first two series against the Kings and Calgary, I like to call them, I've coined this for their Mike Smith-isms. He has these moments where he's really good. And then he almost every series, he does something ridiculous, and it's not in a good way. Like in the first series against Los Angeles, in the very first game, he coughed the puck up right through the middle. LA scores, they win that game, right?
Yeah.
In Calgary, he lets in a 136-foot goal. Like there's just something about Mike Smith. He has this ability to do the most ridiculous things in a negative way. And then he's got the shortest term memory ever. Like he forgets that he did that. And he plays a hugely solid game the next time. Yeah, fantastic, right?
That's what you want,
Yeah, absolutely. And he can get it out of his head, and he can come out and shut you down the next game and play really solid. So for the most part, Mike Smith's been pretty good. I don't think most of this is on him, and I can see why they keep going back to him, because it hasn't been his fault. He's been pegged their starter. They're running with him regardless of sink or swim. So when people see this, if Edmonton's out, he might have made another mistake in game 4, but it probably won't be his fault if the Oilers lose. Like that's just usually how it goes. Now, the last goal in game 3 was not good. Like that was the Mike Smith-ism for this series, I'm hoping, right? That was that moment that he has where you're like, okay, at least that one's out of the way. Now let's see if game 4 is good. I expect them to come out and be really solid tonight when they play. I think the Oilers are in a rough battle, but because you don't win 3 in a row, 4 in a row to take out a series here. Usually it's not how it goes, but they just got to not get swept. And I think that's Mike Smith's mentality coming in, and the rest of the Oilers just don't get swept. All this good stuff we did this regular season, everything that we did in series 1 and series 2, it kind of gets erased if we get swept by Colorado here. So don't do that. Win your game at home, go to Colorado, see if you can't grind out another one and go from there, but just don't get swept. And Mike Smith, I think, will have a really solid game. So he's been decent, but he's had those Mike Smith-isms where you're like, dude, what are you doing? He makes you nervous when you watch him. He's really good. He's really competitive and feisty, but he makes you nervous almost all the time.
I didn't realize he's 40 years old.
Yep.
He's an old man by hockey standards. Well, the goalies can usually go a little longer, but
yeah.
All right. Well, finally, we have to give our predictions about the outcome of the series between the Oilers and the Avalanche. So let's start with Brooke. Do you think that the Oilers win game 4 tonight?
No, I'm sorry. I agree with you, Jim. I think they'll put up a good fight. I do think Mike Smith will probably have a big game because teams usually do well when their backs are against the wall like that. But I don't see it. I just think the Avalanche at this point have it figured out. So no.
Okay, so no, they are not going to win. It's going to be a sweep.
Although I would like to see them win at least one game.
Well, that's where I'm coming from. I think that the 4th game is always the hardest to win. So I feel like the Oilers will come out ahead in this one. But no way are they going to win all the way. No way are they going to win out. So I could see game 5 be in the end. But we will see. We will see. Jim, you have the final say. What are your final thoughts about this here?
It's going to be a hard game because there's no Evander Kane. He got suspended for 1 game for his hit on Ozan Kadri. So there's no Kane in there. Dylan Holloway's coming in. He's a rookie. I expect a big game from him, even though I don't want to put pressure on a rookie to play real well, but I'm excited to watch him. I think the Oilers win this game. I think they refuse to lose one at home. I think they just absolutely come out with everything they've got. This is the season for them. So they're going to come out and I think they win. In fact, I might actually say they might win game 5 too, because Evander Kane coming back. Beyond that, I think that's it. I don't think Colorado gives up 3 in a row. So they might go 4-2 in this series. Colorado's played really well. So it's hard to say for sure that I think the Oilers are going to win this game, but I don't think the Oilers are ready to pack it in yet. I think they want to win at least 1 at home in this series. They don't want to get swept. They don't want to have that narrative hanging over their head all summer that we had a really good team. We just blew it for 4 straight games against Colorado. I think they put it down, they give it all. Maybe they squeak out a game 5, but I'm going with the Oilers in game 4.
Do you know what's sad is that they had chances to steal games 1 and 3. Yeah. So that has to be so frustrating in the back of their mind. It's not like they got blown out 10-1 in each game. They had it in the back of their hand. So that's probably on the back of their mind too. Like, we just got to win. We were on the cusp of it.
Yeah. Yeah. They've made a lot of their own mistakes.
Yeah, for sure.
But on the other side of the coin, the Avalanche is definitely a favorite to win it all. So they're up against some pretty stiff competition as well. Well, we will see. We'll know by the time the show drops which one of us is correct. So there you have it, you guys. Who knows who ends up being right? But that is a wrap for this show. And thank you so much, Jim, for coming on and talking about Blackhawks and Oilers. And thank you as always to Brooke and to our awesome producer, Matthew. We've got plenty more coming your way as the offseason unfolds. We've got the draft, free agency, trades. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. And
see if Puljujarvi is going to be on the Blackhawks by the time this.
That's right. All right, you guys. We'll catch you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.